So it's interesting, man. Like before we started recording, we were, having a conversation about identity and authenticity, especially as it relates to even college, right? And many of us, when we go into these like predominantly white institutions, we sort of like have to make this decision around like how much of ourselves are we gonna hold on to, right? And it's
Yeah.
interesting because you, even as a father, like you're seeing your kids go into some of these institutions and like seeing what the decisions they are making. But tell me about like when you were coming up, right? Like, was it encouraged to be yourself, or like was it more of like, hey, you should probably assimilate to fit into this American culture?
Your identity is so personal, it shouldn't have to cater to those around you's version of you. When I first came over here, I was 6 years old. And it was a fine existence too, by the way. I try to make sure that people understand that we measure our struggles, because there's others that have it a, a lot worse. And
Yeah.
so I am very toned down about a lot of this stuff. It was what anybody would have had to adjust, right? I was 6 years old. My dad had a great job, came here to the United States for that job. And
And where did he
um,
come from?
from Nicaragua,
Yeah.
from Managua, Nicaragua. So the difficult part was not just that you don't have palm trees or warm weather year round, or the food is different. Like that's a little bit of an adjust. Now everything's kind of very different in terms of the environment, that part of the environment. But I was put in first grade the day after I got here. There was no pre-K, there was no kindergarten. I didn't speak a word of English. And I don't think there was conversations because my parents didn't speak English in terms of those teachers that suddenly have a kid that doesn't say a word. So they left me back in first grade. I remember me
Wow.
pellizcaban, to see if they can get a sound out of me because they thought maybe I couldn't speak. Um, eh, there was punishment then that for being disrespectful of not responding to a teacher, and so they would actually hit you with rulers and things like that. And I remember that the kids would make fun of me because I had, you got that. I had a fly copete, you know what I mean? Like you had the little grease in your hair and the brillantina in your hair, and it looked fly in Nicaragua, but they were making fun of it, and they were making fun of the food that I would bring to school, or that my parents couldn't speak English, and and there was the one answer that I had to everyone, because at that time he was the best baseball player in the world, and it was Roberto Clemente. And that was my answer to everything. They made fun of my accent. Roberto Clemente has one. They made fun of the food I eat. Roberto Clemente ate food like that. He ate plátanos, and so he was my imaginary but real friend. And it was my comeback. And that's why Clemente means so much to me. I wrote a story about it for my daughter, and as I wrote it as a kid's story in Huffington Post, the great Roberto Clemente, and the impact that he had on me as a child. So then you go on, and then people adjust. I adjust, they adjust. It was fine. And again, my existence was fine. My dad had a good job. We came over here for that job. Then there were problems at home. My dad wants to move back to Nicaragua. My mom and my sister go to Paraguay, where my mom was from. My brother and I are in Nicaragua with my dad. We didn't know that that's where we were now going to live. So now you have the adjustment of going back to Nicaragua at 15 years old, where they'd look at me as an outsider. The same way I was looked at when I was 6 here in the United States. I'm now an American version of a more American than Nicaraguan, especially in Nicaragua. And then
Before,
Civil War. Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, before we get into the experience of moving to Nicaragua, tell me about that experience of you sort of like being made fun of in the States. Like, what for you, did you see it as like, oh my God, I need to fix my accent, or I need to be more American? Like, what were some of those
Yeah, then you know what?
feelings at the time?
That's a good astute follow-up question. Um, this is where your makeup comes in, and this kind
Mhm.
of dictated me forever. Uh, My brother's reaction was very different. My sister's reaction was very different. Mine was to fight. Somebody made fun of me, I'm throwing down as a little bitty kid. In English or in Spanish, I'm throwing down. And that was not a smart way to handle it. And I love that my kids are so much smarter than I am in terms of when people are picking on them. But it didn't necessarily mean that I didn't have issues with my own identity. It just meant that that I didn't like anyone picking on me or bullying me. But I had real conflicts where I started trying to adapt, and you to some extent you have to adapt to the environment around you. And there were moments when I was like, oh my Lord, my mom's coming in for this meeting with a teacher or my dad, and their accents, nobody's going to understand what they're going to say. And now my English is getting better. So let me be in on that parent teacher meeting so I can interpret. It's just another layer of responsibility, if you will, for a kid to worry about at 8 years old, that you also have to be on the phone with the banks and with the phone company. So you become the IT guy, you become the financial advisor as a little kid.
The accountant, the translator.
Exactly. It doesn't matter how smart my parents were. This is a whole nother world and another language. So there were those elements. So I didn't necessarily have what my kids have with me, where it's be defiant, be proud of who you are. You define who you are. What? They said what? And seeing me get angry about it, how a teacher might have reacted to something or another student did, and saying, well, you tell them that, I didn't have that at home. It was, you have to adjust. We need to work on our English. You need to work on your English. It was more of just adjust. And that's the interesting thing. Okay, so by the way, this is going to be a 2-hour interview, and you can chop it up however you want. This shit is so deep for me. My son's name, so my son is Juan Antonio. Mm-hmm. I was Jose Antonio. My dad was Jose Antonio. My grandfather is Juan Antonio. We all go by Antonio or Toño or Toñito, right? All of us. My dad's 91 years old. There are people that call him Toñito in Nicaragua that are still around. My name was Toñito. The kids couldn't spell that, couldn't pronounce that ñ. Mm-hmm. So they just didn't. And it's like Roberto Clemente, announcers just started calling him Bob Clement.
Did they?
Yeah, look it up. And on his baseball card, I think it might have had that. So for someone to actually call you what is convenient to them hits home when I'm dealing with this Latinx thing or Latino thing or Hispanic thing or anything else. People should decide what they want to be called. What mm-hmm. is my name is an important statement in so many ways. So they started calling me Tony. Mm-hmm. And my way of hanging on to it was to say, well, I'm spelling it with an I because it comes from Toñito or Antonio, but at some point, everybody's calling you Tony. And even my dad would call me Tony. And I was like, papá, ¿por qué me estás llamando Tony? Mi nombre es Toñito, especialmente en la casa con ustedes. And so there was this beautiful moment when
why did your dad start calling you Tony?
Because he wanted me to get used to it, to be able to fit in better.
So was he the first person? Like, where did that start? Did it start
at school? They were just trying to figure out any way of saying my name.
Yeah.
When they would say it. So they came up with the most convenient way. They saw my name was Antonio, Jose Antonio, yeah. Mm-hmm. And that I went by the Antonio part. So they started, it would be like them just deciding that instead of Jose, that it's Josie. And so it happens, right? And so they just went ahead and started calling me Tony because that's, I guess in a lot of names, that's the short for the Italian version of Anthony or Antonin or whatever it might be. So
it's so interesting because I just wrote a post about this on LinkedIn, and I remember like whenever
You gotta
someone
tag me
asks,
on this stuff though.
yeah, I do have to start tagging you on this.
Yeah.
So like I don't remember like when I first heard my name in English, like my mom, everyone in Spanish calls it Pavel, which is like how it's meant to be
That's
said,
how I say
Pavel.
it, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But I don't. So like my earliest experience that I remember is someone asking me what my name was, right? And in that second, I had to decide: do I say Pavel or do I make the other person feel comfortable and Americanize
Right.
it, right? But no one taught me how to say my name in English because it's not meant to be said in English. So one day I just made up a name and said, "Oh, my name is Pavel," but like that's a made up name. Like that's not how it's supposed to be said. So everyone right now, I still introduce myself till this day. I say my name is Pavel, but that's because I'm still not confident and secure enough to tell
Yeah,
people that
man.
my name is Pavel because
Yeah, man.
I don't feel comfortable making them feel uncomfortable. But I cringe.
Yeah.
But I cringe. I literally cringe every time I say Pavel. But
Yeah.
it's sort of like I need to do like a rebrand of my of myself.
No,
Um,
but that's
but
that's
and
it. That's it.
yeah, and last thing I'll say is that I actually have friends that on LinkedIn and on their resumes, like they will shorten their name so that it is more Americanized. For example, I have a friend named her name is Montserrat. She's Mexican American. On her profile on LinkedIn, her name is Monse, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like easier to pronounce for like the average person. Or I have a friend named Saisha, but she'll just put Sai to be more like acceptable, if you will. You know what I mean? So, but to your point, it's like,
Acceptable and polite, which is what you just
yeah,
brought up, that I think is really powerful, what you just said.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
not
But
a sellout thing. It's trying to be polite to the people that are pronouncing your name. That's deep where you went with
yeah,
that.
but by doing that, like by making other people feel
You lose a
comfortable,
little something of yourself.
exactly, because your name is it's so important to your identity.
Yeah. That's your first form of identity, is what
Yeah,
somebody names you, right? When you're
yeah,
born.
yeah. But
Um,
and you were talking about your children as well before I cut you off. Sorry.
no, 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 you didn't cut me off. You went to a place that I think is important to acknowledge. I did that too, where I then felt more comfortable with Tony than Toñito. It threw me off at first. And then you do rebrand yourself as your confidence grows, as your identity se desarrolla. You really do rebrand yourself. So I just want to make it, I just want to, be really clear on this. It's a process. And at one point, I remember filling out a form where I wrote Joseph Anthony Tijerino. And I probably would have liked to have changed the Tijerino part, because that was like, people would call me Tigerino. And I would say, no, it's okay, whatever you want to call me. Or
Mm-hmm.
now I say,
Mm-hmm.
no, Tijerino,
Mm-hmm.
the same way people, will correct you on pronouns. You know,
Yeah,
we have a right
exactly.
to do that. But I just, but that was, yeah, I was doing that. I gave into it, and and you start losing yourself. And a part of it was that I wanted to be more Americanized and more accepted. And then things happen. So I'll jump to my son, and then maybe I'll just jump here then. So then now I'm in Nicaragua, where I don't really belong in Nicaragua now, the same way I didn't belong in the United States. I'm talking about to other people. I felt fine. I mean, I was born there, but I wasn't made to feel like I belonged there now. It was just kind of a novelty. El Americano, and and um and so this I think happens a lot in a lot of our immigrant communities, where you the sense of belonging is really important, and you have to adjust it over and over again, because now, and I'm sure it's like this in other cultures as well, and I know it is, because whether you're from Sri Lanka, whether you're from Nigeria, whether you're from Nicaragua, whether you're from Dominican Republic, I'm sure there's that struggle of where you belong, how you belong. And I remember being in Nicaragua, and they would make fun of my Spanish accent now. the same
Mm-hmm.
way I was being made fun of when I was a little kid.
Mm-hmm.
And but then Civil War breaks out, and they were kidnapping my, my like family members, and it was really bad. And so my dad at that point was like, "You guys got to go, and you got to get out of here right now." And so the plan to take us to Nicaragua didn't work out so well. Um,
Wow.
and at that point, they, he sent us over to an aunt in the Midwest, in rural Illinois. So that's where we ended up. And this happens, I think, to a lot of folks. So now it was a different struggle than when I was 6. Then it was just kind of a little bit of identity. Then it was a little bit of the language, and the in a new environment and everything. Now we're going back to the United States, except we're in rural United States,
Mm-hmm.
not Washington D.C., where it was a very different place. And so we're now one of the only people of color in the entire area, which is now completely different. But back then, we're trying to connect with my aunt, which is not an easy thing. That's why whenever I hear these, the migrant reunification efforts, it's not always easy. Not everyone wanted 2 teenage boys to show up at their doorstep that just fled a country in turmoil.
Right.
But at the same time, we spoke the language,
Mm-hmm.
which you can't compare to somebody that didn't speak the language. One thing, as a little kid, you're almost cute that doesn't speak the language. And now this is, as a teenager, we already were acculturated. No podíamos defender. I mean, we knew how to get around. But I was also 15, 16 years old on my own with a 14-year-old brother, trying to figure things out in a whole different part of the country where life is completely different. So that adjustment comes again. Now, and it didn't work out with my aunt and uncle. So we were going from friends' houses, staying over there, sometimes in a car, sometimes trying to figure it all out. Knowing, though, that we also had the safety net that at the end of the day, we could go, we had someone we could depend on. They were going to take care of us in some way, but it didn't work out in terms of living there. And I remember being in class, and once again being picked on for different reasons now, but kind of the same. And once again, just fighting and everything else. And there was a turning point. I remember this gym teacher would say, like when the teachers are picking on you or making fun of you, it's a whole different thing. The other kids then feel awkward. It was so fascinating that this teacher would say things like, "I smell beans," or "Hey," he'd say Tigerino or something because they didn't want to pronounce my name right, and sometimes it was making fun of it, Tina or whatever. And he would say, "Hey," after the showers, when you're done playing sports and in gym class, and he'd say, "Hey, you missed a spot. Your back's still wet." And then he would start laughing, going, "You get it? You get it? He's a wetback." And so I'm hearing this from the gym teacher. And I remember that that's when the other kids really stopped doing that, like saying those kind of things. And once again, you adjust. There's a group of people that are nice, and then the existence was fine. Everyone adjusts to you, you adjust to them. And I had a fine, high school life. It was kind of different because we were on our own. But at the same time, people were very accepting and good. But I do remember going to a dance type of thing with this girl that I really liked, and she said yes, we can go, whatever. And then I was going to pick her up in my car, and she said, "Listen, I think we can get away with it." And I said, "Away with what?" She said, "Just pretend to be Italian." And I was like, "What?" She goes, "Well, you have O's at your name, so I think we can get away with you just being Italian." And I said, "But I'm not Italian." And that was a moment when it wasn't out of pride that this was when my pride started swelling, and I didn't go out with her. And I started lunging forward with my Latino-ness around that time. Before, if I had a problem, it was because I just didn't like a bully. It wasn't necessarily my Latino pride that I was fighting for. But now all of a sudden, it was my Latino pride. It was taking pride in my parents' accents. It was taking pride in not just Roberto Clemente, but the person that is working on a construction site. It's taking pride in my uncle that we were there, my aunt and uncle. It was taking pride of my brown skin. It was taking pride in my hair. It was taking pride in being an immigrant, which it was a kind of a defining moment to some extent. And then I came back to the DC area. I have no idea why I didn't do it before. There was nothing really holding us there, but we just got through high school. And then I wanted to go to University of Maryland, which was where I wanted to go all my life from the time I was a little kid growing up in the DMV.
And sorry,
and
before getting into Maryland, like, what do you think about that experience made you want to embrace your culture?
I think it was that somebody, as I was a young, I wasn't a 6-year-old. I'm going through this as a 16-year-old, as a 17-year-old, and it hits you differently. It's now that they're not just not accepting me, or she's trying to pass me off. It's now that somehow she's doesn't feel comfortable with me, or doesn't feel comfortable with my parents, and doesn't feel comfortable with the Latinos that I've known in my life, including, the people that are hardworking, that are around us, that probably wouldn't be accepted. So that was a defining moment for me, Pabel, because I was now not representing myself. I was now representing everyone I knew. And I've had those moments throughout my life now. And it's something that I like to say whenever I speak, that you don't represent yourself. Pabel does not represent Pabel.
Yeah.
Pabel represents everyone that they've ever met, ever seen on a movie, ever seen in the news. Mm-hmm. You carry a weight. And I think it's the same thing. Women have to deal with it. I definitely, Black people have to deal with it. Muslims have to deal with it. You have to now gay people have to deal with it. Trans people have to deal with it. Our non-binary siblings have to deal with it. You now represent everyone that they've heard of that is part of that, and in these rooms. And we're in rooms of privilege. Your job, you're in rooms that you're now representing a whole lot more than just Pabel Martinez. And I'm in rooms that, whether if I'm meeting at the White House, I'm not representing me. I'm representing everyone that isn't in that room. And that's a very important point too, because you don't have to be, we also need to represent beyond ourselves too. And I've been in a lot of rooms recently where I'm this weird, somehow competition that I'm seeing resurface again between the different groups. What we want to get is based on what another group is getting. Oh, the Black community is getting this, therefore this, or the Asian community is getting this, therefore this. And I've been in rooms where I have to blow up the room and say, I'm not comfortable with this kind of talk. Base what you want to get out of your position. Don't base it on what somebody else is getting. You should celebrate that. Be a real ally. Be a real ally to the Black community. Yeah. And when it comes to that too, we have to deal with something else, which is racism, homophobia, sexism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism in our own community. You call somebody that's disabled the renco. That's a horrible thing to say, but it's somehow accepted. And forget about what
we I think, like, I saw a meme somewhere that said Latinos the nickname that Latinos give you is your worst insecurity. You know what I mean? Like let's say you put on some weight, your abuelita's gonna be like, ay, que gordo, gordito. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like a thing.
Yeah, yeah, and you're supposed to accept it. So that activism within our own community starts within our own families. I, I, I will continue to correct my 91-year-old father. And he goes, ay, papito, you know, and it's, but I'm going to hammer it every single time. And it's the same thing that I'm hearing in a lot of closed rooms among Latino leadership. And I'm like, no, I'm not comfortable with that kind of language. I'm not comfort. And they're, well, there's supposed to be a safe space. Well, it's not safe if I'm in it. Stop inviting me. And I'm not going to put up with any homophobia of any sort. And I'm not going to put up with any Islamophobia or not, or, you know, colorism, you know. And if I get called out on something, I'm listening. I welcome it. I'm listening and I'll adjust.
Yeah.
Educate me, illuminate me. And that's happened over the years. And it's continuing to happen by people around me. And I tell people, you know, you also need to be able to do it in a way that is going to be, again, you know, to educate and to illuminate, not to castigate. But at some point, you got to throw blows. So, you know, so that all goes back to identity too, and how comfortable one is in those situations. I'm very comfortable now, but I'm also in my late 50s. I'm so comfortable being me. I'm so comfortable being me, standing up for others, standing up for myself. It's completely different. And that's why a quote, a quote that kind of made its way around, that, you know, is that you're not lucky to be someplace. They need your perspective. Pavel is not lucky to be at TikTok. TikTok's lucky to have Pavel and your point of view and everything that you bring. And it's the same thing. Every single person that works for me, that doesn't mean have a sense of entitlement, you know, but it means that you're there for a reason. And so if you're in a room and you're invited to a fancy room, you're there to represent. If you're on a board and you're the only Latino on the board, you're there for a reason. And you have to have a mission in that space. And as soon as you leave that board, part of your responsibility is to make sure 2 or 3 come in after you that are going to represent different communities. And you need to point out too, when somebody's being racist or sexist or homophobic and everything else, it's our responsibility too. You don't have to be a woman to be offended by sexism and to stand up against sexism. And it's the same thing across all the different areas. And so I think we're getting better at that, despite the confrontations being bigger. And I'm always just very comforted by looking at youth, and I work with youth. So when I see those trends changing there, that makes me feel better. And boy, you're going to have a tough time, viejitos, having a problem with, you know, being homophobic when a third of what I'm seeing of youth not identifying as straight.
Yeah.
So you better adjust. We keep talking about adjusting. Well, people my age need to adjust more and more and more every single day to be relevant. You want to be relevant? You do it through youth, not through yourself.
I agree.
But anyway, in every step of my career and my life, I've been that 6-year-old walking into a classroom, not speaking a word of English. I've been that 16-year-old being picked on by a gym teacher. And I've been that 17-year-old, 18-year-old, you know, being told to pretend to be Italian in order to go out on a date with her because her parents might not be accepting of me. And fast forward to my son, who is, again, Juan Antonio, and has no idea that that's his name, because we've called him Toñito from the time he was born. And so he's in class, and the teacher is like calls us desperately saying, hey, we don't know where your son is. We're doing roll call and it's in kindergarten. And so we get to the classroom, we're like, but he's right there. And they're like, no, we were asking him what his name, if his name was Juan Antonio. And he said, no. And because he's Toñito. He owns that name.
That's
And
beautiful.
I don't know what his feelings are. I think he's kind of weird because I watch movies with him. So I'm definitely trying to influence him. Like we'll watch Fruitvale Station. We'll
That's a
watch,
powerful movie.
we watched Dallas Buyers Club. I watch heavy stuff with him. We also watch fun stuff too. But I showed him the Basquiat movie. You know, I want who was a Haitian Puerto Rican artist. You know, we watch movies on feminism of famous feminists like Frida Kahlo. I want his identity to be his, but I want to make sure he has a lot of options and a lot of choices as he does that. And so I don't know where he is with it, because I know sometimes he rolls his eyes at me and he says, why do you have to define everything? Because now he's 13. So now he's and I'm just like, you know what, you're right. You know, I got to stop doing that. So he goes, yeah, right. Why can't I just be who I am instead of having to say I'm this and I'm this and I'm this, you know? And I'm think about that, and it's kind of my style here at Hispanic Heritage Foundation. It's like basketball is now, you know. It's a positionless game now.
Yeah.
And I look at identity that way in terms of my kids, that they want to be positionless, but at the same time be able to play their game. And it's wonderful to see that. But I just but I love that his name is Toñito and everyone knows him as Toñito, and they don't even know what his full name is. And I saw him making sure that Enya is on there, because now that makes him distinct, where it might have been a little weird before, where people got to call him Tonito. He's now saying, no, it's Toñito, because it's his name that we gave him. And it doesn't represent him. It represents his papi. It represents his abuelo. It represents his great-grandfather. It represents Nicaragua to some extent, which he may not totally identify with right now. I certainly didn't at that age as much, and I was living in it. You adjust in life. My daughter, who was kind of like, oh, why do you have to put me in the same boxes and everything else? She really identifies with it. And my little 10-year-old, who's more fair-skinned, is identifying more and more with those things. I heard her talking to a friend going, well, I'm Latina and Asian, you know, at 10. So she's farther ahead because she sees her siblings. And when we had the George Floyd murder, without urging from me, my 10-year-old at that time was 9 years old, was taking stones, painting them, and writing Black Lives Matter and putting them all over the park. That
Beautiful.
From a dad, oh my goodness, I could cry right now, is so powerful. And it's the same thing when my daughter and I were going somewhere, and I said, go and buy stickers, you know, for her water bottle. And those stickers were Black Lives Matter, Pride flag, no human is illegal. It was beautiful to see my children having this sensibility. And I'm going to be more proud of that legacy than anything else, that they have this sensibility, this empathy, this connection.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And I'm sure part of that confidence that they have and pride comes from you. You know what I mean? Like, as much as they see their siblings be themselves, they see Papi being himself and embracing himself and doing all those things and being defiant. So that representation that you're creating is huge. And I just want to make sure that we touch on the professional side, because I think that's another area
Yeah. No, it's all connected, bro.
I think many of us code switch. Well, not code switch. Yes, we code switch. But I think going back to those early years where you know, you looked around and not many people look like you, and you try to assimilate to like um, what most people around you look like, right? And early on, right, it's just because we want to make friends, we want to be part of a social group and social
Right,
setting,
right.
etc. But when we get into professional setting, like that impacts our livelihood, right? Like that
Yeah,
impacts how much money we're going to make, how much, not only for us, but many of us are like supporting families here and abroad, right?
yeah,
So, and right now I think you're in an interesting place where, like, you know, you're later in your career compared to like when you were doing like internships potentially, right?
yeah,
I'd
yeah.
love to better understand, like, how comfortable were you stepping into a quote unquote professional setting these days versus early on in your whole, like, in yourself, like who you were?
Night and day, bro. There. I have no problem now in any setting.
Yeah. But tell me
I
about those
mean,
early years. Like, what was that like? Was it
it was
intimidating?
different then. It was different then. I did feel lucky to be there. Um,
Yeah.
I I I remember actually the self entitlement, sense of entitlement that other kids had. Like I remember working at a PR firm, and we were being sent to run around to and it took me a while to graduate from college, and I didn't have my papers until I was 27 years old, 28 years old when I became a citizen. So my perspective was very different. And I worked at an all-you-can-eat seafood place, bro. All the waiters out there. Let me tell you something. That's who I want working for me now. That's the criteria that I have. Have you waited tables? And my main core people that work with me, they've all waited tables. That's a skill set, baby. That to me was what shaped me best. But I remember them complaining, I didn't go to college to be an errand, to be an errand boy, and I can't believe they're making us run back and forth. And I'm just like, man, air conditioned cab to go to Capitol Hill and deliver something to a member of Congress, like some papers that you had to deliver instead of smelling like fried shrimp all day long. um I was like, this is great. And I had the same, I would have the same shirt that I would wear pretty much every day because I didn't have any money. And I remember I was like selling blood under 3 different assumed names. So because you could only give blood, I think, once a week or something. I forgot what it was. And I was doing it like under 3 additional assumed names in addition to the one I had, because that way I could do it 4 times a week. Because and I wasn't making much money, and I was thrilled. I was like, this is so much better than what I was doing before. I was at a restaurant, waiting tables. All you can eat is different than waiting tables. It doesn't stop. You
Yeah.
don't just stop at a table 4 times while they're eating their food. It's over and over and over again. Like my view of what we were doing there in a professional setting was like, I am so glad to be here, and I need to learn. And I had trepidation about speaking up because I didn't want to say the wrong thing.
Hmm.
Um, and I had people that were very nice to me that at the very I didn't that at the very least made me feel like I belonged. And I'm still friends to them to this day. Some were colleagues, some were even like younger than me, but they became almost mentors not mentors, but just somebody that kind of that made me feel comfortable. We did a charla on belonging. And it was a very interesting charla you should take a look at, and how one feels like they belong. What is that sense of belonging that we look for? And when we get it, what does that mean? And how complicated it is to get to that point? Is it that important to belong if you belong in yourself? Like all of these issues are complicated. But I remember these guys all had like gray hair, gray suits, and white skin, and they seemed so smart. And I started noticing they're smart in some ways. They're not very creative. They're not very in touch with the communities that they're supposed to be serving. Are they really that smart? They don't have a hustle.
Yeah, it's
Um,
like, are they that smart, or are we just putting ourselves so low in that pedestal compared to them? You know what I
Well,
mean?
but I think part of it, Pavel, is what is that value proposition? It's figuring out what you add
Yes. Yeah.
and how it fits into this bigger space in this in the environment you're in. So I started figuring out being creative, being connected to the communities they're trying to serve, um, that being bold, that those are things that they were lacking despite their degrees and their suits, um, and their hair color. And then you start figuring out where your value is, little by little. And a lot of times that's a process too, because then you become valuable to them as they pass off your ideas and your input as their own. And you kind of have to wrestle with that to say, okay, well, that's my value to them, which is going to make me valuable to them and keep me in this job. Self-advocating is a whole different thing, though. I remember calling my dad going, should I ask for a raise? No, 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 te pagan cada 2 semanas. Sí, pero te dan seguro. Sí, bueno, entonces, what are you doing? You're gonna throw off the whole arrangement you have here. You just be happy that they're paying you every 2 weeks and that they're that you're providing insurance. I remember a 401k. I never got it going, as a savings plan that they were offering at that company, because I didn't know what 401k was. And you don't have necessarily that at that time. I don't remember them having that in Nicaragua, so I couldn't get any guidance on that. So, and then also speaking up when inappropriate things are being said. And let me put this too. Also, being called out when one was doing inappropriate things that might have been okay in the 80s, like saying stupid shit, you know, that makes you feel uncomfortable, but then you're also not being called out for making somebody else maybe feel uncomfortable. I remember also working on AIDS issues in the early 90s. I had a friend who died of AIDS, and so I started working on those issues. And at the time, my mom had cancer, and I remember people saying horrible things to me. So it was like, and at the same time, I think the community that I was working with were also looking at me like, well, you don't belong here. You're straight. And the straight community was looking at me like, you don't belong here. You're working on these issues. It all goes back to that feeling of, where do I belong and why aren't I, you know, how much of this is me feeling though I belong, even if others aren't making me feel that way. And but I worked on, but those are other things. It's not even just who you are, it's the issues that you take on, the things that you speak out about now are shaping your identity to others and to yourself. And taking those stances. And it's weird. I was, despite feeling lucky to be there, despite being hesitant about speaking up on certain, but I did on certain things. I remember I wouldn't work on certain clients that just didn't fit with me. And so I carry that over now. So it's just, there's a whole mix-up thing where you're kind of picking and choosing what you felt really strongly about. And I remember people saying rude things to me. And at
Like
some
what?
point, well, first of all, saying horrible things about the, you know, about in the middle of the HIV/AIDS crisis, and hearing that kind of stuff. So it was like homophobic stuff, even though I was straight, which is always interesting, you know, to hear that stuff. But it gives you a perspective, right? A lot of sexist things, and a lot of racist stuff that you would hear.
These are
And
from
I
your
grew up.
colleagues? Or
Oh yeah, yeah.
wow.
Look, man, I'm still hearing that stuff. I'm hearing that stuff in the Latino community.
Yeah.
No. We have a blueprint as to what not to do from how we're treated, and then we still do it within our own community. Look, I can be in a room full of middle-aged Latino men And the only difference between, and by the way, I'm one of them, the only difference between certain Latino men and white men is that one has a better tan. It sounds pretty much the same. and so it's those are all opportunities for us. But I can remember being propped up because a client, we were working on an issue where they didn't want to hear a word from me and just shut up and fax, because at that time we were sending faxes out all the time. And that then 2 seconds later, a client's coming in that is the government of some Latin American country, and I'm now being put into that room as if I'm a vice president. So you see all that kind of stuff too, and you're like, okay. Or when they would do a promotional thing, and all of a sudden you see them rounding up the few Black and Latino faces. All right, come on. And you know what's happening. And so I remember like refusing actually and saying, no, you go ahead. No, they're more prominent in this organization than I am. You go ahead. And I remember also though, that I would work on a lot of different issues. I would volunteer a lot. And it was, the volunteerism was in the, again, with like women's shelters, the homeless issue was big to me, HIV, AIDS, Black community was big to me, Latino community. And I would work in these spaces and would try to bring the company with me into those spaces, where then that becomes a case study that they could use to get a client. So I figured out really early that you also need to present a value proposition to the person that you're trying to change. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that's the easiest way to do it, you know, to make it something that is going to benefit them. And in the business world, you can do that. If it makes business sense to them. Those are the easiest ones to tell. But to try to build empathy among someone on an issue is a lot deeper. I think people mix up sympathy and empathy. You know, mm-hmm. Sympathy is somebody is hungry and you give them a sandwich. Empathy is someone's hungry and you share a sandwich with them and listen and connect with how they got to the point where they were hungry. Yeah. And I have to call myself out, because empathy also works where it's someone that doesn't agree with your position on things. And sometimes that can be, and this is a really tough thing, which has got to be my next level of development, is to empathize with somebody that sees me as a threat. Mm-hmm. That sees my brown skin, that sees my immigrant status as a threat, that sees how I view certain issues as a threat. And how do I empathize with them to better understand them, to then better communicate with them, to then better have them understand my position. And I'm working on it. I'm too quick to go from a few minutes of trying that and then getting into a contentious environment, and I'm too quick to that. So I need to spend more time building, you know, getting to the point where I am empathizing with somebody that has completely different views that I don't agree with and I abhor in a lot of ways. To better understand them, to then better communicate with them, to then better have them understand my position. And so I'm too quick to jump to a confrontation. So it's complicado, hermano.
Yeah, no, it's so complicated. And I think it probably gets more complicated as like the higher you get in your career as well. And
man.
That's what I was always so curious about.
It's fucking complicated as a little kid.
Well, I'm so curious.
It's easier now. It's easier now. I know who I am. It's complicated when you're a kid trying to figure it out.
Interesting.
That's when it was really complicated. It's more complicated for you, Pavel, in your career than it is for me at this point. At this point, I walk in a guayabera and everybody else in a suit, and I'm good.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought.
I walk in. No, man, I walk into a meeting. I walk into meetings and I have no problem stating my point of view. And if they don't like it, they can leave or I leave. I don't have to negotiate my identity anymore.
Mm.
I don't negotiate my identity. I don't negotiate my stances and everything else. I learn, I'm open, you know, but I'm not walking in there trying to impress you.
Mm.
I am not. I'm also not insecure about what my position is. I know exactly who I am. And that works in a lot of different ways. Before I remember having to like put certain words in or like drop my credentials into everything and all this other stuff. I, I don't have to do that anymore. Oh my goodness. When I was younger, I would have to mention that I did this or that I graduated from college or that I know
Yeah,
so-and-so.
yeah, yeah.
My resume was like 20 pages long because I was putting in there every little thing because I was so insecure that they wouldn't get the essence of what I had to offer, you
Mm-hmm.
know? No, it gets easier when you get older, bro. For me, at least. Like, I'm so comfortable being me. I say and do what I want. I do it in a respectful way, and I also respect what other people say. But I'm not asking permission from anybody to be who I am or what I stand for. So I actually think it's harder for you, and I think it's harder for the 20-year-old, and I think it's harder for the 10-year-old. You're trying to figure that stuff out.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I want to do with this is understanding that it takes time to get to that point where people are comfortable. Like,
Yeah,
I want to help people get to that stage faster in their life.
yeah,
And I think through these conversations, like, I'm building representation to show people that it's okay to be yourself, and you can thrive in whatever work setting you're in and be yourself, right? Because I think for many people, we don't see that representation. We see people that may look like us in senior leaders, but they're not being themselves. You know what I mean? So we continue to see that representation of like, oh, well, all right, well, like, I could be Latino and I could be a CMO, but then I still have to get rid of my identity, right? So seeing people like you gives us that sort of reflection to say, no, I can do both, right? So I love that. I love that
seeing
what you're
people
doing.
like you doing
Thank you.
this is more inspirational than seeing people like me on your podcast. I just want to make that clear. That inspiration is coming from you. It's not the other way around. I'm in a position that you have farther to go, and for you to be in this space is laudable and it's inspirational. Um, Look, being who you are is a lot easier than trying to be someone else.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's a lot of
It,
work. I used to I used to
I was
spend
so
entire
insecure when I was younger. Oh
I
my
used to
goodness.
spend I used to spend entire weekends. I've told the story before, but like, I used to spend entire weekends, instead of listening to music that I wanted to listen to or watch shows that I wanted to, I would literally study white American culture. So like, I would watch Riverdale, I would listen to Bruce Springsteen, I would like go to these restaurants that I had no interest in eating at. I would sacrifice my weekend activities just to study those things so that when I go into work Monday morning and people ask me what I did on the weekend, I could be relatable. Or like, when I went to client
Yeah.
dinners, like when I went to
Awesome.
client dinners and people were like, "Oh my God, what'd you do this weekend?" Instead of saying, "Oh, I went to a Mark Anthony concert," I could say, "Oh, I went to this like Bruce Springsteen festival. It was amazing." And like, people would find me relatable. But like, these days I don't do it anymore. But I want more people to stop doing that. So that's what I'm really
Yeah,
trying to
let me just say this though. First of all, Bruce Springsteen is the boss, and he spent a
do.
lot of time studying Chuck Berry. So it all gets connected. But that's also important too, is to have an open mind. Like, I want to be able to listen to ABBA
Yeah.
and appreciate as much as I want to be able to listen to Johnny Lee Hooker, as much as
Yeah.
I want to hear go-go music,
Right.
as much as I want to hear Ravi Shankar.
Mhm.
It's really important that you get to taste all of this, and this is why I love that my son sends me samples Because through rap, he's now able to know who Thelonious Monk is, and James Brown, but he's also able to know who some of these other people that are being sampled that would be so random that you'd never know who they are.
Yeah.
So I love that about him. That, you know, that he's able to tell me, did you know MF Doom was sampling this Saturday morning cartoon show? And I'm like, yes, that's awesome. I remember that show. So there's this connectivity that all of this is a way of informing yourself and
Yeah.
broadening our vision and our point of view, and listening is a big part of that. And
Yeah.
that's something that you're doing right now by doing this. He's still alive, actually. It's a monk from Vietnam, a Vietnamese monk named Thich Nhat Hanh, and he was actually nominated by Martin Luther King to be a Nobel Prize winner back in the 60s. And he talks about intentional or deep listening that actually will help the person who's speaking to somehow release their suffering by listening intently. That's a very powerful notion, that by having this intense listening, that you're able to help the person who's talking deal with their suffering. And that's, to me, when we talk about allyship, that to me is allyship. It is deep listening, like Thich Nhat Hanh was talking about. And a lot of times we get so caught up in our own suffering that we forget that just simply listening and being a real ally will go a long way to others supporting you when your time comes, and it comes for all of us in different ways. So it's beautiful what you're doing. I don't know if you had more specific questions, because I'm all over the place, but I'm all over the place in my life. But please ask. I'm telling you, I'm good all morning. This conversation is so important. You can then chop it up any way you want. But we haven't even gotten into a lot of different things, and I just have to tell you how important it is. But it took a while to get here, and I still know colleagues that, and I'm still not completely there, but I still have colleagues that don't feel comfortable, that I see in meetings, and they're just like whispering to me, going, "Thanks for saying that," you know, and thanks for bringing that up, because they may not feel comfortable in their jobs, as I do. I'm very comfortable in my job. I don't want to do anything else. This is it. They may not feel very comfortable in their own identities, which is complicated. I don't judge anyway, call somebody else a sellout and all this other stuff. I don't ever want to do that. Everybody has their own pace. Everybody has their own journey. Respect it. It don't impose what you do on someone else. I'm going to do my thing. You know, you want to hold my coat while I'm throwing blows? Hold my coat. It's fine. And but I've seen it play out with professionals that are a lot smarter, a lot more steeped in their values than I am, and yet they don't speak up, and a lot of times. And there's so many different factors to it. And let's face it, gender. I love an outspoken woman and Latinx woman, because, good Lord, they've got a whole nother layer of stuff to deal with than we do, that has been there from the time that they're born.
Yeah.
You know,
and I was just gonna say, no, there are so many different reasons, to your point, why someone doesn't feel comfortable in that situation. Could be their career. I mean, we have privilege, even just some level of privilege, even just like being men as well, right? To your point, like Latinas, Black women, etc. You know, they have an additional sort of hurdle that they have to get over in people's perceptions of their ability. So, I mean, we can talk about this for like all day. I'm very passionate about this as well.
I'm good, man.
Just to wrap up, like I always finish with this question, and it's interesting because everyone has a different answer. But you know, as you look forward, right, your journey isn't over. There's some things that you mentioned that you still want to work on. Like, what's one thing
Tons.
that, yeah, tons.
No, tons. You don't
Yeah.
understand, because inspiration comes from everywhere. You're
Yeah.
inspiring me right now. When people ask me, and I don't know if this is what you're going to ask me, but when people ask me, like, what's next for the organization,
No.
I say, what does the community want to be next for the organization?
Yeah.
My community leads me.
Yeah.
It's not the other way around. So I just want to make that completely clear. So whatever we do or I do is based on what the community needs, what the community wants. And that is exactly how I do that. I follow the community.
Well, maybe your answer to this question is going to be the community, but what's one thing that continues to empower and inspire you to continue being your most authentic self?
Meeting people like you, meeting people that every single day I come across. Um, I have a text right here. Just got it this morning that just says, "Hey brother, thinking of you. Hope you're doing well." And I write, "Oh, I love you. I'm so proud of you. Dale." And he goes, "I love you too." Getting this text from a kid that I've known since he was in high school, that is a real leader from a very young age, helped pass the DREAM Act in Maryland, started on DocuBlack, um, is so special to me. And we connect with each other maybe every few months, probably sometimes longer than that. But he's in my heart. He's in my mind. He is my inspiration. The same thing that I got in a text from, Elisa Juarez, who I've known since she was in high school, that she texts me, and I haven't followed up with her because I have to have a big conversation, and she just texts me and just sends me pictures of her and her baby. That inspires me. So inspiration is everywhere. Just have to prepare yourself just to accept it when it comes, in any form. And so I am energized every single day, starting this Leadership Institute and hearing from 300 kids that represent in one way or another all 50 states plus Puerto Rico and District of Columbia. That's inspiring. Doing our coding program that we're hosting somewhere, and we had it online, and finding out that a couple of classrooms in Jamaica were logged onto it to learn how to code as well. That inspires me to then say, we need to do what we're doing for the Caribbean and Latin America and beyond. So going down to the border and seeing what is happening on both sides in McAllen and Reynosa in Mexico, and seeing the most vulnerable and what their journey is going to be, how much farther they have to go after coming here from Honduras, and all of a sudden they're on our border and they've got so much farther to go. Working with the farm worker community, because I was inspired by Monica Ramirez. I always appreciated the farm worker community, but now I'm down because of Monica's inspiration. Seeing these leadership trainings that Juan Sepulveda has been doing. This is inspiration, what you're doing, Pavel. So that would be my very long-winded answer, is that inspiration is everywhere. Our responsibility is to allow the opportunity to be inspired, to accept inspiration. And it's really that simple. So that's what keeps me going. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I can't wait to do it tomorrow.